Welcome back. We're taking a look at what's ahead for Africa. We're going to focus now on Zimbabwe. Cash shortages have created problems in the country, and civil workers went on strike demanding to be paid in US dollars. The president, Emmerson Mnangagwa, who took over from Robert Mugabe a little over a year ago, is trying to attract foreign investment and put the economy back on track. To discuss all of this, we're joined by Nhlanhla Sehume. He is a journalist from Johannesburg. Also from Johannesburg, Terence McNamee is a global fellow for the Africa program at the Wilson Center. Thanks to both of you for joining us. We will get to Zimbabwe in a moment, but let's start with South Africa. In Nhlanhla, 2019, that will be a big year for politics in South Africa. The country will be holding national elections for the National Assembly as well as the provincial legislatures. The ANC, the African National Congress, has held the majority since 1994. But its support has been slipping. What are expectations for this election in 2019?
Well, all eyes will be on the ANC as it prepares for this year's elections, being the ruling party in the country. But a lot of questions have been asked about what exactly the policy of the ANC is when it comes to pressing issues such as the land question and having to contend with an economy that's struggling. I mean, just numbers coming out from the World Bank today are forecasting South Africa's economic growth during this year at just 1.3%. That's a meager number, because you still have a country that's growing its economy at less than 3%. And it doesn't help that South Africa also is a country that has to contend with rising unemployment, especially among the youth. So you have a very depressed state of affairs in the country when it comes to creating jobs, and the ANC will be the focal point or the main players here in as far as being quite clear in as far as what their policy is. The party is heading to its manifesto launch this weekend, where it will basically set out its plan for the year and how it will govern should it be given another chance to lead the country after the 2019 elections.
Terence McNamee, we just heard Nhlanhla Sehume tell us there about some of the big challenges that South Africa faces. I mean, in addition to high unemployment, corruption has been a major issue. In fact, that's what led to a change in leadership in South Africa. Jacob Zuma stepping down, his place taken by the new leader, Cyril Ramaphosa. Now, in this election year, can Cyril Ramaphosa meet the challenges that the country faces?
Well, there are two conflicting views on that question. Essentially, expert opinion is divided. Cyril Ramaphosa is a market Democrat. He understands how to run businesses. He understands how economies work. And he's generally well liked by investors because he speaks their language. But at the same time, there is real concern that he's not going to be able to turn this ship around. The rot is too deep. There are too many challenges, and the reforms are not radical enough to reverse what was essentially under President Zuma a lost decade. Some estimates put the loss to South Africa's GDP at around $50 billion and 2.5 million jobs. So he's got a massive task on his hand, and it's uncertain over how this will play out.
Nhlanhla, Terence raises a good point there, that this is going to be very difficult for the new leader to turn the ship around. Does that give the opposition, the main opposition in South Africa, the DA, the Democratic Alliance, does that give them a chance to make some gains come the 2019 elections?
Yes, of course it does. And already some parties like the EFF in South Africa, which is the third biggest party in the country, is already playing on some of what the ANC has been struggling on, especially when it comes to the issue of land expropriation without compensation. They seem to have been the leading voice to champion this plight, saying to South Africans that, look, we are the party that will actually get the ball rolling, that will not only bring the matter up in Parliament for discussion, but also be the party that will implement the policies of land expropriation without compensation. So certainly parties like the EFF, not forgetting the DA as well, which despite having its own internal party challenges this year when it comes to issues around governance and leadership challenges within the party, they certainly are still the main opposition, and they will be pressing on some of the weaknesses of the ANC, such as the ANC not being able to create jobs in the country. I mean, the big coin word for a lot of politicians, or rather political parties in the country, has been around the issues of jobs, with the DA using the issue of jobs for its own electioneering, saying that, look, the ANC has done nothing to help South Africa's youth, and they will be the party to champion a job creation within this country, and there will be a party that will boost the economy and invite, or rather encourage, investor confidence within South Africa.
Terence, I'm going to move a little bit north now, north of South Africa, to Zimbabwe. That country has a new leader. Well, he's been there for some time, but relatively new after decades of Robert Mugabe's rule. Emmerson Mnangagwa. Now, he's on a trip to 5 Central Asian countries. He will also be going to Russia. The purpose of that trip is to seek foreign investment for Zimbabwe. How big a job does he have?
He has a massive job on his hand. I live in Johannesburg, and many of us who are from the more prosperous parts of this city have Zimbabweans in our homes as our gardeners, as our domestic helpers. And they've just returned from the Christmas holidays in Zimbabwe. And the overwhelming view is that things are not only better, but in fact they are much worse than they were before the coup. And that in terms of basic foodstuffs, in terms of lines at banks, in terms of medical care. The situation is really dire in the country. And although President Mnangagwa has made some nice sounding promises and commitments about turning Zimbabwe into a middle-income country by 2030, in reality, investors regard Zimbabwe still as quite a risky investment. So he's got a real challenge on his hands.
Nhlanhla, as Terence points out, the new leader in Zimbabwe, he has made some promises, but if you look at the cabinet that he has right now, many of the old faces are still there, still the old faces from the Mugabe cabinet. What does that tell us? I mean, do you see much ahead in the way of major change?
Much of the same faces in President Mnangagwa's cabinet, and this is really depressing a lot of Zimbabweans, not only in neighboring Zimbabwe, but Zimbabweans residing in South Africa, like Terence clearly put out. Look, there's a lot of criticism on the new president that he's failing to hear the pleas of many Zimbabweans who are still facing many challenges regarding rising costs of commodities. Something as simple as bread in Zimbabwe being something that's inaccessible, or commodities like fuel as well having seen a drastic rise in prices. So people feel like it's much of the same thing. They see no difference in as far as the tenure under President Robert Mugabe compared to what they have now, and seemingly looking to other countries, such as South Africa, for a better life for themselves.
Terence, of course, Robert Mugabe implemented some very controversial policies in Zimbabwe, the land reform policy being one of them. White commercial farmers were effectively evicted off their land. Mugabe also introduced a new policy on foreign investment in which the majority of shares had to be held by Zimbabweans. It was a sort of 51-49 formula that he used. Do you think any of this will change?
Well, I think some of those policy specifics will change, and the new president has articulated his commitment to make those changes. But this legacy of President Mugabe, which is very much one of division, of ethnic scapegoating, and really destroying what was a once burgeoning economy. Unfortunately, President Mnangagwa seems to be affected by the same disease which infected all of ZANU-PF, and that everything is about power and staying in power. So I have strong doubts that he's going to be able to make the necessary reforms and, frankly, bring healing and unity to a country that is as divided as it ever has been.
In Nhlanhla, of course, there are many countries in that part of the world, in southern Africa, which belong to the South African development community. Do we see much cooperation between these countries?
Well, a country like Zimbabwe would most naturally look to countries like South Africa for some assistance and finding ways to boost investor confidence and finding ways of helping Zimbabwe become what it used to be, the breadbasket of Africa, inviting investment into Zimbabwe. Yes, the President, Emmerson Mnangagwa, has said that Zimbabwe is open for business, but he has been very careful to communicate this to the rest of his neighbors, to say that, look, we need South Africa, we need Botswana as well to assist us in helping build this fledgling economy, the economy that really isn't doing very well right now.
Terence, looking ahead 2019, how important will foreign investment be for these countries in Southern Africa?
Well, incredibly important for both countries, but I think for different reasons. In South Africa, a rise in foreign investment will really be an important shot in the arm for President Ramaphosa. And I think he needs that. He needs that confidence boosting from the international community. He has certainly a lot of goodwill from them. In Zimbabwe, it's facing really two scenarios. I think the best case scenario is that we'll see a gradual improvement in the economy and some recovery, but we'll see increasing or the same kind of authoritarianism we're seeing. But the worst case scenario in Zimbabwe is by no means impossible to imagine, and that is that ZANU-PF continues to factionalize and perhaps violently, and we see the economy slip into further dysfunction, hyperinflation, and then who knows what will happen then.
Nhlanhla, of course, South Africa has a very powerful and very influential business community, but they also must recognize the fact that, as you pointed out at the beginning of this segment, that South Africa faces economic growth of only 1.3%. That's very anemic by any measure. What are you hearing from that business community?
Well, the business community seems to be setting their eyes on the ANC's policy manifesto that's set to launch this weekend to get clarity on a number of issues. And like I highlighted earlier on, the biggest one being the question around the issue of land, the issue of land expropriation without compensation. So the business is demanding answers, or really waiting for answers from the ANC as to yes, we do hear your policy, but how are you planning to implement this particular policy? And what type of land is going to be affected by this proposed bill, this land expropriation without compensation? Yes, the president of South Africa has said that meaningfully that South Africa, yes, is open for business and invited, or rather focused on inviting about $100 billion that he's targeted to raise as an investment coming into the country. 35 billion of that money, yes, has been raised, but you know, the business community has many questions and is demanding answers from the ruling ANC.
Okay, Nhlanhla Sehume, Terence McNamee, thanks to both of you for joining us. That's it for this edition of The Heat, but the conversation continues online. Join us on CGTN America's Facebook page to comment on this or any other show, or chat with us on Twitter at CGTN America. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.